Guten Tag, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another Mini-ITX PC build themed video thingy. So, before I get into this, I'd like to say thank you for those of you that watched the past 4 episodes of this. I don't know if this is going to be called episode 5 or whatever the hell it's going to be, but that playlist has like 2,000 views cumulatively, which is badass. I had to do that anyway, and hopefully it inspired some of you to look into Mini-ITX PCs or whatever. If you got enjoyment out of it, that's enough reason for me to do it, and got a lot of good feedback, so thank you for that. So what's the purpose of this video? You're probably thinking, well, that's well and done, you know, you made a PC, and now what? So as you can tell, I am back in the old setup, so, you know, ultra wide now, see Audacity running, and we're back to a full tower. So what does that have to do with the Mini-ITX? Well, if you're just joining us, what I'm referring to is 3 months ago, 4 months ago at this point, I built a small CUB PC to take with me down to New Orleans, where I was interning at the time. And I couldn't take this fucking behemoth right there. At least I didn't want to, because I had limited space, and I don't really like the idea of taking liquid cooling down for 800 miles, so I decided to take as much power out of that as I could and put it into a small form factor. And the goal was to lose basically no performance and to spend as little money as possible, and I think I did that quite well. So ended up spending about $300, put in some older hardware, a decent power supply, some other things that I could reuse over the years if I wanted to, but was able to scavenge a lot of parts out of the full tower. Well, now that I'm back, I've transitioned fully back to that, removed around parts, but the Mini-ITX is now in a new form, and I'd like to take you guys on the ride and show you the process of bringing it up to its new self, what it's made of, and what the hell we're going to do with it going forward. So I hope you like it, and stick to the end. This is going to be more of like a cut-up post-commentary type thing, because, well, both times I've been building PCs here in the past couple weeks, it's kind of not really been conducive for live commentary, and you get better audio, so isn't that what you want anyway? And it's only one video, I guess. We'll see. So yeah, stick to the end, and we'll, you know, I'll do a little review of the new parts and what I thought about the Mini-ITX experience as a whole. See you there. So returning home, I have the GTX 980 Ti CUB build as it existed and as I used it with the Fantex cooler and a single stick of 8 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. Of course, the full tower here I left basically under a blanket to keep the dust off with its liquid cooler and the rest of the RAM. So we're going to take all of that good stuff that was in there and put it back in there so I can use it here at college. Obviously got to start with taking the side panels and top panels off of our Mini-ITX case. I absolutely loved this Core V1 by Thermaltake, by the way. Absolutely recommend it for anyone who's first time building with a Mini-ITX. It has plenty of room. It's pretty forgiving, and cable management honestly wasn't that bad, but even with experienced builders, if you want to do something crazy like liquid cool it, you could absolutely do a full custom loop in this thing. I was very surprised by its acoustics, thermals, everything, and it served me quite well. It fit perfectly in the back of my single cab truck, and everything comes off really easily. As you can see with the front panel, you just take it off, but it's still secure. You got a massive 240mm fan up front for all that good cooling that you need for your even high-end components. So taking out the 6+8 pin, or 6+2+6, I guess is the way it would be, power adapters here for our monster 980 Ti, and the little cover here that adds a little bit of premium fill to cover up those nasty screws. Dust control and everything was actually pretty impressive, considering there was no filter on the side. It turned out looking really nice, and if you don't think that's a beautiful cooler, there is something extremely wrong with you. Obviously inserting it back into our full tower, no problemo there. You can do it one-handed. I've done this about 18,000 times with this card alone because of moving it back and forth between these cases for testing purposes. And voila, finished product, and all we have left is that single stick of RAM. Now that cooler, that Fantex cooler, made it to where I couldn't use another stick, and I had a spare set that will come up later in this video, and that's one of the problems I'm going to try to resolve during this build log. So taking that 8 gigabyte stick, putting it back in our full tower for a total of 16 gigabytes of 2133 megahertz RAM in dual channel, which is pretty sweet. After a quick little dusting, we're back in business. Obviously got to test it out and make sure everything runs just fine. We got all the lights. Insane amount of dust coming out of there, even though I did have it covered, but just build up on the outside of some of the parts that weren't. She did boot. I don't know if I actually show the screen or not, but it did boot, no problems. Updated the drivers and whatnot. Unfortunately, I forgot to get a couple files off, so I had to put it back in, and no problem though. Here we are back at our main setup here with the ultra-wide 2560 by 1080 monitor, full towers back in, and this is what I've been using to record and make footage and all that good stuff, videos for the channel. But now we're here with a half-empty Mini-ITX case. So what are we doing with it? Well, we're going to take off that Fantex cooler there and put it back in its box that you see here. It's meant for HTPC builds. At least that's what I'm probably going to do with it going forward. We're going to replace it with this CryoRig M9i. And let me tell you, this is probably the best $21, $22 I've ever spent. The packaging is insanely good for a $22 cooler. And there's a lot of impressive features on this thing that makes it, in my mind, should cost a lot more. And of course, I bought it for that zero interference. Means we can use any type of RAM we want. It will fit because it doesn't overlap slots. Thank God. So removing it here from its package, like I said, it has a very, very nice packaging scheme for the cost. That other cooler cost about $35, $40, and I think this thing honestly deserves that price tag. But just going through the accessories it comes with, spare wiring and cushion for the fan. We'll get into that systems later. But otherwise mounts pretty much the same as any other modern day coolers, including that Fantex there with the plastic back plate, a couple hexagonal screws that you go through, and then you place the cooler on top and use the 2 thumb screws there. So very cool design on this cooler. That is the reason I bought it. Overlapping plates to give it more surface area, and it just looks very premium. And the black cover on top that hides the heat pipes, really cool looking fan. Obviously included thermal paste here. It just made it a no-brainer buy for me going forward with this build. Now, for whatever reason, I couldn't locate my anti-static wrist strap, so we're going to go the old tried and true method of just plugging in the power supply and turning it off. That should eliminate most grounding issues. Now, of course, we're doing the exact same thing in reverse as we're building this thing, taking off the side panels so we can access all that glorious cable management. Unplugging the 24-pin motherboard connection was a bit challenging, but other than that, wasn't too bad. You got to take off the fan on this particular CPU cooler to be able to take off the cooler, of course. But the way they do it's kind of strange because they have holes within the heatsink itself to access the thumb screws, or in this case, actual screws. You can't fit your fingers in there unless you're like a 2-year-old or something. But I started tackling the cables first before I remembered that you can't get to the CPU 4-pin connector until you've taken off the heatsink. That was a roadblock during my initial build log that if you watched it you will have seen. I had to take off like so many parts to be able to access it because I just couldn't get my hand there. Now I have a 120 millimeter Fantex fan that's just sitting out free. So like I said, going through these little portholes to be able to get the heatsink itself off came off quite easily, and had some good thermal grease contact there. Pretty good spread on the heat spreader on the CPU itself. I figured this would be a pretty good opportunity for better cable management. So as I was taking stuff out, I was kind of planning in my head where to go, because I kind of had some stuff running different directions that should have been kind of bundled together, and having that CPU pin right under the heatsink really screwed up my initial plans, and having that USB 3 to 2.0 header because of the older motherboard connections also made things a little bit harder than they would have been if you had a new motherboard. That 650 watt power supply I'm using is definitely overkill, especially now in its current form, but I'm going to keep it around just in case we do put better hardware. And honestly, it's hard to find good gold power supplies and lower wattages. Taking out the motherboard is certainly easier than putting it in this thing because of that damn terrible I/O plate that has all the little springy shit on it. Can we stop doing that, manufacturers? I think we have, but so yeah, it came out with a breeze. Just got to take off the standard mounting brackets, and like I said, we'll set that aside for now for further cable management. So this is pretty much exactly what you've seen once again in the other build logs, just in reverse. And my phone actually died, the phone itself didn't, the camera app actually died as I was filming, putting on the mounting brackets and the heatsink itself for the new cooler, but it's literally this in reverse, except the brackets were angled and they didn't have nice little plastic rings to keep those on. It was the screws themselves that did, which surprised me, but it worked quite well. But pretty much any halfway decent cooler nowadays is going to mount like this. You got a plastic backplate with some screws that run through. Either the screws will bear the load themselves, or you'll have little, plastic rings that'll do it for you. And then you set another bracket on top of it, and then the heatsink on the bracket itself. And that's to keep from over torquing and better compatibility with like AMD platforms, because all you got to do is add a couple more things. So, like I said, that's the finished product. Getting to that point was extremely simple. Like I said, exact same procedure. You thread the screws, you put the brackets on, you screw those in, then you screw down the heatsink, and got a little bit better application of thermal paste this time. This fan, though, was a little bit of a bitch, but I'm not going to complain because, number one, $20 and everything else in this package has been stellar, and mounting the heatsink was about 10,000 times easier than the other fan tech, so I'll take a little bit more difficulty in the fan as a result. And as you can see, the CPU pin back there is completely accessible, and boy does it look beautiful on this. And best part, we get to use both of our RAM slots, which is what I was mostly concerned with, and that CPU cable is the fan cable is just perfect length. So we're going to take our spare set of Ripjaw G-Skill. I believe they're 1600 megahertz. That's what they defaulted to. And like I said, we can access both of those points there. I planned to use these initially on the first iteration of this, but I couldn't access it, so I had to steal the 8 gigs of RAM, one of the sticks out of my main workstation desktop. And that's not a big deal. It just means you're running in single channel, but for gaming that doesn't really matter. And they sit perfectly, no interference with the fan, and putting it back in the second time was about 10,000 times easier than doing it for the first time, because those that IO plate had already been bent to shape. I got all the wiring out of the way, and generally was not as nerve-wracking. But I still hate that backplate. I really hope motherboard manufacturers have gotten away from that. So doing the same thing in reverse, just screwing it back in, a little bit more cable management. This time I was able to get that CPU cable in the first try, no big deal, and found a little bit extra space by running it under the space where the second hard drive can go for the other cables, and made it a bit more clean than the last time by the time the side cable or the side panel goes back on. So we're gonna do our first boot here, make sure she turns on. We got the green light, everything's good, and she spun up just fine. Front 240 fan giving us good airflow, and as you can see, my Olympian body reflected in there. We're good to go. So this is a gaming build. We're going to put a graphics card in it, but the 980 Ti is being used, so we're going to use my spare 970. And I think this is actually a better pairing for the CPU that's in it. The only problem is it does have a backplate on it, which is more premium feeling than the 980 Ti, but I think, that made me wonder about clearance issues with the CPU cooler, but we're about to find out how that, what happened. So I'd planned to sell that or give it to someone else on a trade, but it didn't work out, so we're going to put it in here for now. Actually getting it in there was a bit of a challenge. The other cooler was a lot less interference-y with the PCI slots. You can see me trying to put this in here about 15 different ways. And that backplate did make it a little bit more difficult. So I figured, let's just loosen that front fan, get it out of the way, and it did go. It is touching the CPU cooler, which, don't get me wrong, I'm not extremely excited about, but it's not bending either one of them. The backplate on the card is making it rock solid. It's completely like 90 degrees. I could put an angle to it. It's perfect. The CPU cooler is touching, but it's not bending or anything. It's not putting any stress. They're just in contact with one another. Is that ideal? No. And this could have been completely missed if they would just move the damn LGA socket up like a centimeter. I don't know why they did that on this motherboard. It's so badly designed, but I think newer generation processors design around that, and that's no longer a problem. But everything is in. It did boot, and there's no problems as far as fan or current, and it does run like a champ. So final product, as you can see, it looks almost identical to before, except now we have 2 sticks of RAM and I think a more fitting CPU cooler. I love the look. I love the premium feel to it, and I think it'll go with about any color scheme build. So I'm not going to run the PC through the gauntlet like I did last time, but we're running ultra-wide Battlefield 4 here on Ultra, and averaging around 100 frames per second in the firing range. Now, when you're actually in-game, it's not going to be that great, but on maps like Metro, you can average to 90 to 110 depending on where you are. But of course, more open level maps, you're going to get about a 75% decrease of what I would get on my 980 Ti. But you could absolutely play, 2013-ish games, less demanding games in ultra wide on a 970, which I didn't think was possible before I tried that, to be honest. All the load temps and stuff look good. Our CPU on load is getting about 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, which is what I expected based on the benchmarks. The idle temps are not as good, but it is an older, Ivy Bridge CPU, so it's not going to be as good as stuff like Haswell. And we have barely enough RAM to run an ultra-wide, depending on what stuff is being used, but it does work. And there you have it, folks, our GTX 970 Mini-ITX build that's about a quarter the size of the full tower, but still games like a boss for the price. Alright, so mission accomplished, right? We have our Mini-ITX, it's completely done. We're using all of our spare parts. We got one more in the closet, but we'll find something to do with it. So now what? Well, I have two PCs now, so yeah, that's a bit of a conundrum, isn't it? What am I going to do with it? I don't know yet, to tell you the truth. I've got a couple of options. I can make it a guest PC here, but Ashton kind of plans on leaving his rig in my room so we can do, recording and all that good stuff together locally, which would be ideal. That means I can leave it at my parents' house, and I'll have a rig for, going home on break and weekends, and I wouldn't have to drag that thing if I want a PC game, but it'll be sitting there 90% of the time, and I'm not really one to just leave a lot of, something that's useful that someone else could use just lying around. So, selling it is an option. I don't know yet, though. But now that I have it completed, I can make a plan, and we'll figure out what we want to do with it later. But it's a badass little rig for, we're talking a graphics card from the end of 2014 that's still holding its own in modern AAA titles, even with its 3.5 gig gate. Still waiting on that $30 NVIDIA. But yeah, I'm not sure yet. But what I can tell you from this learning experience, even if I end up selling it or do whatever, I am the type of person, I like full towers. I like these ridiculously large monstrosities of cases. I like to be able to have room for, more cooling, with better airflow, with room for radiators, expansion cards, more hard drives than I'll ever know what to do with. I just like that end of high-end PC gaming. That's what I like, even though I'll probably never do a custom loop in my life, but I like that kind of stuff. But I can tell you from experience using this Mini-ITX for 3 months that 90% of PC gamers, that's all you need. Most people are going to buy a single graphics card that they can afford, the best that they can afford, upgrade it every couple of generations when it stops performing the way they want it to, and you're going to be done. You can go out and buy a case that's around that size, even smaller. You can buy something like a Dan case when they're available that's smaller than a Razer Core and fits an entire PC in it. We're talking something that's like barely the size of a next-gen console or current-gen console. But you got room for an SSD, an extra hard drive. You can either put a really power-efficient CPU and set up. That way you're talking low heat, low power draw. You can even put enthusiast hardware, something middle of the road like an overclocked i5 that will last you for years to come. But the point being is you don't need these big bulky PCs to be able to play games really well, because 90% of gamers are in that mid to mid-high range anyway. But you can, I've proven you can put enthusiast grade hardware on this thing. You can put liquid cooling on single radiators for stuff like overclocked i7s and stuff. So Mini-ITX is more pertinent, more available, and makes more sense than ever before, I think, in modern PC gaming, which is awesome. Being able to have something the size of a shoebox and, be 5 to 10 times more powerful than a console, that's pretty cool. So, yeah, I don't know what I want to do with this thing, but it will either it will be used. It will either find a good home if I can't find a use for it, or I will find something to do with it, whether it be with rendering or something. I might wipe it and make it a music station. I don't know. We'll do something with it though. But it is certainly good for gaming. 970 will see some use, and I'm happy that I now have a new favorite of CPU air coolers, which is Cryo Rig. So I guess you got a little bit of review on that side as well. So yeah, that should be the end of the Mini-ITX Chronicles for now, unless we find something else to do with that case. And really appreciate you guys joining us. And like I said, at the end of the day, I hope this kind of stuff makes people more interested in building PCs, and especially mini micro PCs. And if you have an example or want to show off your rig, just send them my way. I'd love to see them. And I'd like to thank you guys for joining me. And if you haven't seen the other playlist, this may be in the same playlist. I'll link it somewhere, a card, something, I don't know, whatever self-promoting YouTube bullshit they let you do nowadays. And we will see you in more PC building escapades later down the road, whenever that might be. Thanks for joining us. Bye!